The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Now, that is not a quote from Carol Dweck on growth mindset, but the diligent amongst you who saw the episode title will have guessed it was actually Socrates. Now, Socrates was one of the first of the Stoics and not only helped build the concept of Stoicism into what it became, but he also helped father the entire field of philosophy in general. For anyone into human psychology and self-improvement, there is a lot to learn from Socrates, as he was the absolute king of not fooling oneself or lying to ourselves about the things that we know. And as you should be aware, the biggest way to undermine a growth mindset is to lie to yourself that we know more than we do and think that there is not an improvement to be made when there is. Now, no one thinks that they have a fixed mindset. We just think there's no requirement for us to grow on a certain area. But that is the fallacy of growth mindset, is that we blind ourselves to the improvements that we need to make. Socrates said that the first step to wisdom is admitting your own ignorance. True wisdom comes to each of us when we realize how little we understand about life, about ourselves, and about the world around us. And in fact, the only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. And he stated that the only reason he knew he was intelligent because he knew that he knew nothing. So, hello and welcome to the Growth Mindset podcast, and we're diving into the psychology and practicalities of self-improvement as always. I am your host, Samuel Webster Harris, and it's a delight to dive into the history of mindset and improvement today with some of my personal top lessons from Socrates. So, who was Socrates anyway? He lived around 450 BC before Christ and taught many students, including Plato, who wrote the book called The Republic, which was a founding text of democracy and the general philosophical insight into how to create power systems that would not create tyrants at the same time. And he also taught Alexander the Great. So Socrates was definitely related to some pretty major powers, and he came about before Buddhism or Jesus Christ, and yet there's a lot of similarities in some of his stories, which we'll dive into later in the show. But he is famous for his style of questioning, and the term Socratic dialogue and Socratic questioning are, of course, named after him. He was brilliant at getting people to understand the flaws in their thinking and showing them what they did not know. Now, many people didn't like that, but one of the problems with human thinking is that we do not see ourselves as wrong. Naturally, we always think that whatever we thought was correct. The ego wants us to be correct, and when we spend time coming up with an answer, we kind of become a bit tired and don't want to spend any more time thinking about why we might be wrong. We actually prefer our answers to just be correct straight away. And we'll often have personal investment or gain in believing a certain opinion, and we don't like our opinions to be proven wrong. Yet Socrates always took the mindset that people's default thoughts were probably incorrect and full of bias and broken logic. He would be the last person to say the words, "trust your gut," because your gut will lie to you in a million different ways unless you actually look at the logic of what the hell is going on and why your gut might be saying it. He did not believe he was very intelligent due to being aware of his own stupidity and failures, yet everywhere around him he saw people who were even stupider because they couldn't even see their own stupidity in their blindness. There is a legend that the Oracle of Delphi said that he would be the smartest man alive, and when he was told this, he said that this could not be true, for he knew he was not very intelligent. Yet then everyone he spoke to didn't even have an awareness of all the wrong things that they were thinking and how stupid they were. And so he was like, well, I'm just the least not a dumb person here, as opposed to thinking he was actually intelligent. He is the man that said that an unexamined life is not worth living. And so he examined not only his own life, but those of the people around him. And he loved to debate things, and he loved to prove people wrong. He would talk to successful businessmen, people in the army, diplomats, and he'd show them how little they knew about everything they thought they knew. For example, he might ask someone what it meant to be just, and when Cephalus told him that it would be to give each man what he is owed, Socrates would then look into that definition and be like, well, if one might owe someone to return them a knife after borrowing it, if that person that you owe the knife to has gone mad, they might harm themselves, and returning the knife would not be a very just thing to give to someone that's gone mad, would it not? And so he would prove people wrong by these very annoying little niggles of things that made people look kind of stupid when they thought they were confident in the thing that they knew. And like the example that I just gave there, Socrates would commonly take something that someone had stated and create a scenario when the logic someone was using actually created the opposite of what they intended. Now, this would become very frustrating for the other person and make them look like a bit of a fool for having these beliefs that they didn't even understand themselves. But for anyone with a growth mindset, this sort of feedback on the errors in our beliefs would be very valuable. His goal was always to uncover unquestioned assumptions, misconceptions, inconsistencies, and contradictions in people's thinking. A classic piece of Socratic philosophy, for example, would be the Charity Conundrum of the banker who would happily ruin his $500 shoes to save the life of a drowning girl in a muddy puddle. And asked if it was worth $500 to save the little girl's life, he would say, yes, of course it is. A life is so important. And then when asked to donate £500 to save a girl's life over in Africa, he would be like, I'm not so sure about that. And suddenly he realizes that what he believes is not quite what he believes, because he's not actually willing to spend that money to save someone's life. It's just that if the girl is dying in front of him. Now, we all like to think that we are kind and that we care about human life. But this scenario, most people are actually unlikely to be as kind and willing to preserve human life across the whole world as they think that they really are when they start looking at their actions this way using some Socratic thinking and philosophy. And basically, any statement that you might make where you say, people are always Y or I am always Z, I'm sure Socrates would find a way to prove you wrong and question your implicit assumptions, because assumptions are just the human mind's lazy way of just coming up with a default answer without having to spend time processing it. But when you always come up with the default answer, you can lie to yourself and you miss these small cracks in your thinking and don't realize how much stuff is hidden underneath all these little patches that your brain creates for you. So we can learn a lot from realizing how many assumptions we live our life by about who we are and the world around us. Besides the examples I gave, there are plenty of other Socratic questions that you can use to aid your understanding that are worth keeping in your dialogue and having conversations with other people and yourself. This is also one of the reasons why it's quite nice to have therapy, because you actually can have someone to really kind of question your assumptions and beliefs and ask you why you think those things and what might be other ways of thinking. But these are some really good questions that you might want to consider using more often. The first is, what is another way to look at it? Whether it's a problem or a solution, anything in your life could have a different set of eyes and a different way of understanding it. Another question is, what would be an alternative way to the way that you're thinking or the way that you're doing something? Or maybe, how would other groups of people respond to this problem and why? What might someone who believed X think instead of what you think? Can you explain why the thing that you think you have to do is necessary or beneficial and who actually benefits from it? Why is the way that something is done the best way? What are the strengths and weaknesses of doing X this way? Or to try and give yourself a new perspective on some different things that are going on, try asking why those two different things actually have similarities. And these are all questions just to give yourself a different set of perspective and a different light on things that you're thinking about, and remove some of the assumptions and misconceptions that you might have about it, and just make you a more aware, more knowledgeable, and more open-minded person to all eventualities. And that is, of course, the essence of growth mindset attitude to things. And so many people don't ask any of these questions about so many things in their life. And yet, if you ask them if they have a growth mindset, they're like, yes, I have such a growth mindset. I'm always willing to do more. And you're like, you don't have a growth mindset at all. You just think that you have a growth mindset because everyone thinks they do. Which is why I think it's important to actually spend time listening to podcasts like this, or actually going into these things rather than just having this unquestioned assumption that you, of course, have a growth mindset, because that's what everyone else does in the world. Anyway, I just gave you lots of different questions there that you can use at will in the rest of your life and with other people to make yourself a more growth-oriented and intelligent person. Sadly, I don't have time to give you an example of using every single one of them because I have some other things to cover from Socrates. But I do think it's just very important to adopt a mindset of questioning from different angles and different sources of opinions, especially in our modern day and age where it's so easy to fall into the way algorithms will automatically have a preference of the things it shows us, and that those things will be opinions that we agree with or opinions that we completely disagree with, so much so that we agree with the opinion that we originally had. And the content that we consume often just doesn't give us the nuance of questioning our own thinking in the way that you really need to be a more growth mindset orientated. So this means that it's really up to us as the individual to start putting more work into opening our minds and opening ourselves to perspectives, which really is the essence of living with a growth mindset. I think it's quite fascinating that actually one of the issues with the Socratic method when used in schools is that it can cause students to disengage, as when you use the Socratic method on asking someone about their beliefs, it's basically the practice of proving them wrong. So if you're proving a student wrong regularly in public, it can lead to those students simply not engaging, which is sad. But for yourself, remember that failure is a good thing, as every time you fail, that means you've learned something. Socrates himself said that the greatest mistake you can make in life is to continually fear that you might make a mistake. And to be fair, it's not just students that don't like being proven wrong. In business, in family, any life where you start asking people questions and becoming a bit annoying, they might start to disengage and not like interacting with you. So I think you really have to make an effort to make it obvious that you're just seeking intelligence and wisdom, and you're not just there to be annoying and prove people wrong for the sake of being an idiot. Socrates himself was killed due to the fact that he just constantly proved people wrong and he riled people up the wrong way. Also worth bearing in mind that you want to be like a bit more compassionate about it and don't just go out of there to prove how intelligent you are. Now, there are two more mindsets I really want to dig into from Socrates before we go into the actual book summary of the last days of his life. The first is his mindset towards appearances and ego. He said that the greatest way to live with honor in this world is to be what we pretend to be. That means that the way to gain a good reputation is to endeavor to be what you desire to appear. So instead of creating airs and appearances of what you want people to think about you, you should simply strive to be the person that you want people to think of you as. And that's the only important thing, rather than telling them what you wish they would think about you. And where this becomes really powerful is when you start arming yourself with the previous Socratic method of questioning yourself, examining the ways that you lie to yourself. You're now ready to approach being the person you want to be with a true growth mindset. When you do not pretend to be a generous charity-giving person that actually wouldn't save someone's life on the other side of the world if it was expensive, you start to realize who you are exactly. You can uncover your own lies with honesty and acceptance so that you can begin the important work of improving and closing the gap between who you want to be and who you currently are. In true growth mindset philosophy, Socrates said that the harder you work for something, the greater you'll feel when you achieve it. And as part of building personal integrity, there will be a lot of hard work. Getting fit, unhooking yourself from addictions of drugs or TV or distractions, any unhealthy habits you have, all involve lots of hard work and brutal honesty about who you are. All addictions are, of course, lying to yourself that the thing that you're doing is okay to do, or that it will just be temporary, or that you'll quit next year. All these lies that we say to ourselves are just a means of hiding. And due to this lack of personal integrity that we have for ourselves, when we shine the light of honesty, it's a very scary thing. Suddenly light up all these lies that we have, but it's how we become the person that we want to be. So as you may imagine, there's a huge amount of topics from what I've just said there that I could dive into that are all very fundamental to growth mindset and self-improvement thinking. But I think you get the overall point that lying to yourself is not a way to be the person you want to be, or it's not a way to get people to think of you as something, because of ultimately people will always work out what you're about in the long run. If you want to live a life where people think of you in a good way, you need to be a good person. And that's about that. So a quick pause for a breather whilst we discuss some of my wonderful advertisers that keep the show running. The last topic I want to talk about is something that's had a very profound impact on my life and has some very strong parallels with Buddhist philosophy. What I'm going to say might sound slightly weird initially, and you might immediately want to question it with your Socratic thinking that you've learned. But the more that you question this philosophy, I think the better it gets. And obviously Socrates was the king of questioning any of his assumptions, so it makes sense that this philosophy will stand up to some questioning. Socrates stated that there is only one good thing, and that is knowledge, and there is only one evil, and that is ignorance. Now, after hearing that, you might want to list all sorts of good things that aren't just knowledge and all sorts of evil things that aren't ignorance. But hear me out on this. What that statement means is that when a person does something that is wrong, their failure to not do what is right is an intellectual error. It's due to their ignorance about what is right to do. If the person knew what was right, he would have done that thing. If the person knew what was right, they would have done the thing rightly. Now, people always do at the point of doing what they think is right to do, which is a very important concept, is that no one thinks they're evil, no one thinks they're stupid, no one thinks they have a fixed mindset. They always think that they are making the correct decision, unless they're like an exam and they're just guessing between A and B or whatever. Whatever you actually do in life, like whether you're having a cup of tea, whether you're smoking a cigarette, whether you're shouting at someone, you always think that what you're doing is the thing that is right to do right then, right there. And it's just a lack of knowledge, the way you've been brought up, your level of awareness of the current situation that means that you think that whatever you're doing is right. And when you realize that, you can get a lot less stressed by people who happen to be idiots in your life, because the world suddenly becomes a lot less annoying and hate-inducing. It's so easy to assume that when someone does something wrong towards us, it's because of bad intentions, because they're a dick, because they don't deserve to live on this earth because they are so evil. But actually, when you believe that that person has just been educated wrongly or is too stupid to understand what is right to do, you can think of them as less evil and instead as just incapable. And you can even take this to extremes and look at the most heinous crimes. And if you take the philosophy that the person actually doesn't understand right and wrong due to the way they were brought up, due to their religion, due to their brain misfiring, it does actually make sense. Like, this person may be an idiot and may even want their evil actions that they're doing to be right and be deliberately fooling themselves and lying about the truth for their own benefit. But it still means they are blinding themselves to the truth. And if they were really aware of the truth, if they could really see that they were doing something evil, they wouldn't actually go and do it. Now, just think of the amount of atrocities that have been committed in the name of God by people who thought that what they were doing was right and holy, but to any outsider, what they're doing is clearly absurd. Now, if you think about it, this is literally just the way those people were brought up to believe something. It's not like it's fundamentally part of their genetics, it's part of their environment that's actually caused them to do that. And so instead of hating them as a person, you can just hate the situations that they've been through to become someone that would do those things, and actually realize that they might still be someone that wouldn't do them necessarily if the environment of the rest of their life was different. And means that you can take those actions less personally towards you because it's not actually such a personal thing. When you look at two opposing armies or religions and wonder why they can do such terrible things to each other, it's because they always think that they are right, when in reality they are both uneducated and behaving stupidly. Now, it doesn't mean that people shouldn't be punished or ever be held accountable for the things that they've done. It just means that we can have some more detachment in our life from initial emotions that get triggered and things like anger, and not let the actions of others ruin our day emotionally without questioning and giving ourselves some time to think about what we actually want to respond like and how we want the rest of our day to go. When you adopt the philosophy that people behaving badly is due to just stupidity, it gives you some distance from the hurtful emotions of anger within yourself, because, like I say, holding anger within you is like holding poison within you that only harms yourself as well. When you realize that holding on to these painful emotions within yourself is a lack of logic and poor thinking on your own part, you start being able to give your brain some time and space to put some energy into working out how you could be more at peace, and putting some time into being a logical human and finding out how you can be happier. And when you learn how to give yourself more peace and more happiness, it's like a superpower to achieve a more satisfied and happier and pleasant life. If you don't know much about Buddhism, it's all about seeking inner peace. And Stoic philosophy is again about seeking inner peace and being tranquil, being unable to be settled or riled up because of you are happy within yourself. And if you truly want to seek a higher level of happiness, and you want an ability to openly seek self-improvement opportunities, instead of being annoyed about life or things where you are wrong, then you need to start looking at life as a problem of intelligence and wisdom or stupidity. And you need to start looking at the good things in life as being derived from intelligence and wisdom, and the bad things in life being derived from stupidity and lack of knowledge. As Socrates states, the only true freedom in life comes from knowledge. And I honestly do believe that this is true. Like, being aware of how to be happier, being aware of how to do the right thing is literally a problem of awareness. There's nothing else. And yes, there is so much knowledge out there and everyone knows what they need to do at a physical level for how to be fit and how to eat healthy, but they don't know at an emotional level how to do those things. And so it is actually still a question of knowledge and awareness when you're looking at how to change yourself. So thank you so much for listening to the Growth Mindset podcast today. And if you enjoyed any of the points today, do feel free to share it with a friend, because that's how podcasts grow. If you are feeling unusually kind and generous, feel free to whack a good review onto YouTube, Spotify, or Apple, because it's much appreciated. And I do read all the comments on Spotify and YouTube if you have them. If you do have any questions about the podcast or suggestions, or if you want to chat, then you can email me at growthmindsetpodcast@gmail.com. And with that, I bid you adieu. Remember that life is to be enjoyed, and that's not something you should put off to a future date, because then you'll keep on putting it off. So be kind to yourself, and whilst you're at it, be kind to someone else too. Thank you so much for listening.
Go you!
Your consistency to reach the end of an episode is legendary.
My hero!
But when we learn things, it's important to reflect. So I politely invite you to take a pause, rifle through the biggest ideas you just heard. So here's your opportunity to hit pause and have a think. Okay, did you wrestle with some insights? Information doesn't stick when we race from one podcast to the next without using our brain to play with the knowledge. So here's another go at a pause. Alrighty, I'll let you off to continue with your life now. If you have any ideas or feedback for the show, I'm always interested to hear from you.
You're the best!
And other than that, please stay curious. Curious. Quote. Smiling for no reason.